I'm Wayne, 11 years old, and from a Romany traveller family. And in 1971, that's almost 50 years ago now, I first went to a primary school in the village near where I lived with my mum, dad, two brothers, and a sister. We'd moved into a house which was a very different way of life to travelling around in our caravan. I was quite a big lad for my age, and because of that, I stood out a bit. When I arrived at the school, I was taken to my first ever classroom, which was some distance away from the main building, and it was a bit like a large hall with great beams on the ceiling. I was quite anxious, really, because I'd never been in a school or a classroom before. And I met my teacher, and there were 40 other children in the class, and my teacher's name was a Mr. North. At first, it was very strange for me. You see, most of my life I'd lived outdoors, and being indoors made me feel a bit, uncomfortable. Anyway, Mr. North introduced me to everyone and said he hoped I'd be happy in my new class, and they'd all do their very best to make me feel welcome. He had a chat with me and asked a little about myself, and he was really interested. And so the next week, because I was settling in and I'd already made quite a few good friends, I asked Mr. North if I could tell the class something about my life as a Romany traveller. See, the thing is, I also love telling stories. He said, "Thanks, Wayne, that would be great." So, that afternoon, this is what happened. Well, I stood up at the front of the class and all eyes were looking at me. I'm sure my face went red. Then I began. My name is Wayne. Well, you know that, don't you? Anyway, I'm from a Romany traveller family. My grandparents, their parents, and their parents before them were all travellers. They didn't live in houses, but in caravans. And years ago, these would have been called gypsy caravans, and they were pulled along or drawn by a horse. They're not used today because most modern travellers have modern trailers. And the first thing I'd like to tell you about are the horse fairs. Does anyone know? Anybody know about horse fairs? The children shook their heads. Well, I drew a sharp intake of breath, pictured things in my head so I could describe them. Every year in July, my family and loads of other travellers go to the horse fair in Appleby, Westmoreland. It's a long way from here, but it's so well worth the journey. Appleby has got a very long and very wide main street and a river. It's really exciting because, as well as seeing all the horses, we get to meet up with family and friends, people we've met again and again over the years. Loads and loads of travellers and people go there in their caravans or trailers and stay overnight, ready for the fair itself. Most travellers go to either buy or sell their horses, and the horses have to look their very, very best. Well, it's a bit like us, isn't it? When we dress up to go somewhere. Anyway, once we've all settled, we take the horses down to the river, and the horses go into the river, splashing their way in, and then we use stiff brushes to work on our horses' coats until their coats are gleaming, shining clean. The coats are all different colours, black with areas of white, just black, chestnut brown, grey, all different colours. And their eyes are big, and their nostrils get bigger and smaller while they breathe in and out. And we also clean and polish their bridles and all the brasswork until it's glistening. And when you stand still and listen, you can hear the different sounds of the hooves on the road. It sounds like a piece of music playing. And some people walk along with their horse and others ride. I ride a horse and it's amazing. It's like being in a boat going from side to side. But once you get the rhythm, you feel at one with the horse. And because you're sitting up high, you can see all the things around you too, which you can't see when you're sitting low down in a car. Then the time comes to buy and sell, and the street is full of people eagerly looking and deciding which horse to bid for. The owners show off their horses, and the horses look very, very proud. Well, I think they do anyway. And then, once the fair is over, in the evening, there's dancing and singing. My granny is a good dancer, and my sister loves joining in. And there's lots of chatter and lots of laughter. Romany travellers love their horses, but we know a lot about wildlife too. My dad taught me about looking for animal tracks, which might tell us more about where the animal is. Might be the droppings of a fox or footprints in the mud. And the other thing I know about are the sounds of animals too, and the sounds at night. I sometimes hear foxes howling. God, it's a really weird sound. And then owls hooting in the trees. And if we're near woods, we used to go looking for rabbits, using ferrets to chase them from their burrows. I know most of the names of the trees too from their leaves, and the names of wild flowers. And now something about my mum. Well, my mum makes primrose baskets to sell. They look great. First, she has to cut hazel sticks to size, different sizes, and then makes a frame that goes into a basket. And then she secures it, makes it all very rigid and safe with nails. Next, she lines it with a plastic bag and then fills it with compost and flowers, usually primroses, and then stuffs moss in the gaps between the sticks. My mum's really good at flower arranging too. She uses special stuff in a vase to put the flower stems into, and then arranges all the flowers and the leaves so they look really, really good. My sister likes to help her too. But I love being out in the woods and exploring, finding things. Last week, my dad and me, we walked up to where there was an old derelict windmill by the side of our public footpath. Dad said owls live there, and if we look very carefully, we might find an owl pellet. He said it looked like a little tiny ball with a kind of rough outside to it. I looked and looked, and there, amongst the dust, I found 2 owl pellets. Dad told me that owls eat things like mice and small birds whole, but they can't digest the fur, teeth, bones or feathers. Those bits make the shape of a pellet in the owl's stomach before the owl spits it out. How cool is that? Anyway, I read somewhere that if you soak the pellet in neat alcohol, you can take it apart and put all the bones back together again and find out what the owl has eaten. I thought that would be amazing to do that. Some people find the way we live strange, don't understand it. But we're all different, have different ways to live. And I'm really glad that I've been able to tell you something about my life, because we can learn about each other by talking and listening. So thank you for listening to me and something of my story. Well, what happened next I didn't really expect, but the whole class began clapping, and Mr. North said, "Well done, Wayne, that was brilliant." And the next day, Mr. North brought a bottle of neat alcohol up to the classroom, and he said that if I'd like to take an owl pellet into the classroom the next day, I could use the alcohol and take it apart and find out what the owl had eaten. So the next day, I did, and I spent the whole morning using tweezers and things like that, washing my hands in between, taking the pellet to pieces. I found mice and birds, and I put the skeletons together. And all the others in the class, all the other children, absolutely loved it. They thought it was really fascinating. Well, the next week, my dad asked Mr. North if he'd like to join us on Saturday going up to the old windmill and looking for owl pellets. He did. Oh, it was really good fun, and Mr. North found his very own owl pellet underneath the derelict windmill. This story is true. And how do I know? Well, because I am the Mr. North, the teacher from 50 years ago, still remembering Wayne, who loved horses, nature, and was happy and proud being himself a Romany traveller. We're all different. We all have different interests, skills, and ways of living. So, be proud of who we are and find time to learn more about others too. And if you'd like to, you can find out more about the amazing story of Romany travellers who go back hundreds and hundreds of years by going to the library, doing some research, finding out more about their amazing story. Thank you for listening. Thank you.